By heating the granite with fire and throwing water along the fault lines, the rock shatters into thick slabs. Then begins the slow process of breaking and shaping the rocks for the dry stone walls. Although it's easy to understand how they built these walls, why they built them is the subject of fierce debate. Was the great enclosure a fortress or a palace? The narrow passage between these towering walls has generated lurid theories. Many believe it stopped men from spying during female initiation ceremonies. Most likely, though, it was simply to maintain absolute privacy for the royal household. That still leaves the enigma of the giant cone-shaped tower.
The first Victorian investigators focused in on it as a sexual symbol, as a male penis in stone. This has been resurrected on several occasions subsequently, but there is no evidence, either in its form, its decoration, to suggest it. There are fragmentary traditions that suggest that it represents in stone the great clay grain bins in which the staple food was stored. And this makes some sort of sense of the monarch, the king, as provider of his people's food.
Funding this vast construction in the 1300s required a booming economy. And the source of that wealth was cattle. A chief's status was based on the number of cattle he owned. A rich man would have many cattle, so he could afford many wives, who would bear him many children, who would provide more labor to cultivate more land. During the dry season, when there was little work, farmers became gold miners. Digging for gold in these narrow mine shafts was so dangerous, laborers had to be bribed to go underground. Most preferred panning in the riverbeds. Gold was the monopoly of the king. He paid his miners in cattle, reserving the gold for himself for exchange and barter with the Swahili merchants of the East African coast. At the height of their power, the great Zimbabwe rulers controlled the flow of gold and ivory to the trading ports of East Africa. And this trade would fuel construction of some of the most magnificent cities in the ancient world. In the 14th century, Africa's Swahili coast was an exotic place, described by Arab sailors as vibrant and affluent, with the most beautiful and well-constructed towns in the world. This was the setting for the legendary adventures of Sinbad and the Arabian Nights. Persian carpets were exchanged for African ivory. Porcelain was traded for gold. Merchants who came from India and Arabia, even from the Far East, had to deal with Swahili brokers, medieval middlemen, who were their only link to goods from Africa's interior. The Swahili built and sailed the dhows and navigated the treacherous channels to the many trading ports. By controlling the sea, they maintained firm control over all commerce in the region. Every year, hundreds of boats awaited the monsoon winds to carry their goods back to the Middle East. By the 10th century, gold, ivory, and quartz